You have to get to a reason why the idea that you have is not going to work, because if you can't get to a no, then you should just keep going. And you have to be brutally honest with yourself. Be like, I need to figure out why the hell this thing shouldn't work. And then if you can't get that answer, then you just keep inching forward. By the time we raised our seed round of $3 million, I had like $35K of credit card, line of credit debt, $5,000 of credit card debt, and like no money in my bank account. So 2018, this is our last shot because we had no retailers. I was actually going to shut down the company. I'm like, look, I tried for like 2.5 years to sell into grocery. The grocers have told me they're not going to do this.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I called it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Yeah.
Listen, if you don't want the show to like move up the rankings, you don't want it to get better guests, totally get it. You know what? Don't leave a review. Just don't do it. Why would you? But if you want to help out, if you want better and better guests, if you want to help the show move up the rankings, then take literally 5 seconds and hit 5 stars. Thank you. Josh, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be on. I've watched a few of the episodes and listened to them, so it's cool to be here talking to you.
Awesome, man. Well, dude, you're in the like food space, food tech space, and actually, I made one investment in that space, but there's not that many companies that play there. Maybe just like at a really high level, like what is Flashfood? So we have some context, and we'll jump into like how it all started.
We help grocery stores reduce food waste. So stores have excess food at the end of every day with 2 or 3 days of shelf life, and normally they have to either donate it, throw it out, or recycle it in different ways. So instead of doing that, we built a mobile app so that they can price the food down, send our users a notification. You could see the deal through your phone, pay through your phone, pick it up in the store that same day. So we took the discount food rack, made it look cool, put it on your cell phone, and all the food's up to 50% off. Most of it's 50% off.
Where's that idea like come from in the first place?
My sister was a chef. She called me after a catering event. She's like, I just threw out $4,000 worth of food. And I'm like, you are an idiot. Why would you do that? She's like, she's like, this feeling sucks. I feel horrible. Like, she was walking home that night and she saw like obviously people that are on the street. And she's like, I just have to shovel out $4,000 worth of food with my boss over my shoulder telling me to do it. The realization was nobody wants that feeling. And nobody like wants to give somebody that feeling. So it's just like, what is this problem? So I started reading about food waste. And what I learned is when food gets thrown out, it usually ends up in a landfill, gets covered by the garbage. And when it rots, it doesn't have oxygen. And that whole process produces methane gas. So the statistic is if international food waste were a country, it'd be the 3rd leading cause of greenhouse gas emission behind the US and China, which like floored me. And then at that time, this was in 2016. At that time, I'm like, okay, like where is food waste happening? And I read a bunch, I talked to a bunch of people.
And why, like, just simple question that came to me, like when you're thinking about your sister there, like why wouldn't they just donate the food to some sort of like, local foundation or something like that?
Whole bunch of different reasons. The main one that organizations don't donate all of their food is because, well, there's a bunch of reasons, but it's logistics. Like who's picking it up, who's dropping it off, who's paying the price, who's guaranteeing the safety. And so any organization that's coming to pick up food, like if you have like a regular scheduled window where you're going to come and you're like, we'll just take everything you have, then I think food companies would be way more open to that, whether it's restaurants, grocery stores, whatever. But what ends up happening is you have like bigger food rescue organizations that will send a truck at like every Thursday at this time to a store or every Saturday at this time. And they go to those stores based on what they expect the volume to be, but that volume could be different. So then they have to route their trucks based on like where they're going to get the most amount of volume. And then from a store perspective, like a restaurant, it's kind of the same thing. Like you don't know what's available at the end of the day, so you can't commit to how much you're going to have. And then the other thing is this is perishable food. So this stuff doesn't have forever. Like you have a short window to do something with it. In the grocery space, almost every retailer donates food in massive quantities. In the restaurant space, the same thing happens. But even still, there's an issue with grocery shopping. So for consumers, when we go grocery shopping, we're reaching at the back for whatever has the longest shelf life. And the near dated stuff moves to the front and we don't take it. And then in addition, if there's one watermelon on the shelf, as consumers, we assume it's the worst one. So they have to overstock the shelves so that we get selection. So like kind of like no matter how you paint it in a grocery store, you're always going to have surplus of fresh food to eat. Then the other thing to think about is like I live in Canada and so do you. like we're able to buy like watermelon and passion fruit in like the middle of the winter. Like that's a modern day miracle that can even happen. So you think about the supply chain and getting food across the world to different parts of the world. Like that's just, it's a miracle that people don't think about enough. So being perfect on inventory is like basically impossible for fresh food with short shelf life. So those would be some of the reasons why like food companies wouldn't donate everything.
When you get this call and you start looking into all this, like, what are you doing at the time? What's like your full-time job?
So I used to play hockey at a pretty high level, and my old agent was a pretty prominent NHL agent, and he brought me in to run a family office for some of his NHL clients. So I was like the rock and ballers before I started flying. I was literally like flying around just to get people to like sign stuff. It wasn't that cool. Like I was just flying around getting signatures on docs, but I
were you closing? So you were like, were you managing money or were you closing clients and getting them on kind of your multifamily office?
We didn't manage. I was managing like the affairs. Like we didn't have like a portfolio that we were managing. We were leveraging portfolio managers, helping with cross-border taxes, like being an NHL hockey player or an athlete in general. It's really unique from a financial perspective because you make most of your money at a young age and there's a lot of cross-border tax implications. There's a lot of benefits to different things like life insurance and what that can do for your family. You have a pension. How many games have you played? Do you get your full pension? Like all kinds of things. So like it was kind of the foundation of building the family office. It wasn't like built out, but we had 5 clients and I don't know, a few like maybe tens of millions of dollars that we were like managing on behalf of players. And it got down to like credit cards and phones and like navigated everything for players. So that's what we were doing.
And so then you start spending time, and what happens? Do you just kind of like get sucked in to this problem? Like you find your mind share, your attention just starts like getting pulled more in this direction?
I started off in banking and I tried to start a company similar to Wealthsimple, like around the same time. And I tried to hire developers internationally. The whole thing failed. I was terrible. I didn't know what I was doing. But a few years after that, like obviously Wealthsimple blew up in a good way. And then the Bank of Scotland fired like 200 of their financial advisors, and everybody who was a client with less than 200,000 got rolled into their proprietary robo-advisor. And I remember saying to myself, like, I couldn't pull it off. I couldn't execute, but like I was right on where the market was going. And the next time I get that feeling, I'm just going all in. Like I'm not going to give it second chance. Like I'm just dropping everything and doing it. So like, now I would not recommend to people probably to like quit your job and just like do it. But for the first 4 years of my working career, I just like saved up money and was like, I'm going to start something.
You're like ready for the moment.
Yeah.
And so how early on in that like research phase do you quit and go all in?
So I read a National Geographic article, was the one on food waste. That was in March of 2016. I think I left my job in like April or May. Like it was like a month or two later, although like I had spoken to a whole bunch of people and I learned that one grocery store, so there's a whole bunch of things around food waste, but one grocery store in Ontario at the time had roughly 40 locations. They had thrown out like $150 million worth of food the year before. So I was like, okay, like check the box on the food problem is there and like check the box on if I got a notification of groceries like meat, chicken, steak, produce for 50% off down the road, like I would buy it and go pick it up. Like that's obvious. So that was it. Like it was like a month or 2 months and then I just quit and dropped everything. I actually remember like leaving a store. I went to go talk to a manager and he was in the store of like one of the most densely populated communities in Toronto. And they had no packages of chicken breast with less than 3 days of shelf life. And I was like, hey, what do you guys do with this food? He's like, oh, like we donated, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, what do you actually do with this food? He's like, we have to pull it. He's like, because customers don't pick it. They like reach at the back and we can't just put 50% off stickers on all this food because then people are just going to buy that. So we have to pull this stuff like 3 days out. And I'm like, okay, if this was sent to people who live in these condos around here, this would sell out immediately and people would come grab it. So that was it. I remember like leaving the store. I called my like then girlfriend, now wife. And I was like, hey, quitted my job. I'm doing this like food waste thing. It's an app with grocery stores. She's like, you know nothing about food. You're a picky eater. And like, you know nothing about grocery. I'm like, I don't care. I'm doing it. Like,
how much time did you have like a personal runway? Did you think about like worst case scenarios and stuff? Or do you just jump in?
I had like, I can share because this is important at an early stage. I had like something like 30 grand, 35,000 in savings. And by the end of our like pre-seed round, I guess, so we ended up raising 450 and 720 over like a year and a half, 2 years, like later on. And we'll get to that. But by like the time that we raised 720, no, by the time we raised our seed round of 3 million, I had like 35K of credit card line of credit debt, $5,000 of credit card debt, and like no money in my bank account. So that like 30 or 40K that I had in savings completely depleted. And then I was living off line of credit and credit card debt. And I didn't pay that off. I didn't get a salary till we raised in like January of the next year. And so that's what my actual runway would have been. At the time when I looked at it, I was like, I have like a little over a year. Like when I had like the 30 or 40K, I was like, I probably like just scrape by for a year. But the app cost, like the first version cost like 15K by the time it was built. And then all kinds of things that like went into it. But I was just like, this needs to happen.
So what's your first step? Like after that moment when you quit, what do you think? Is that where you think you have to go? Like, do you think you have to talk to a bunch of customers? Do you have to sell some grocery stores? Or do you just think you have to like build a product?
So no, before I quit, there's a couple really key things that I had to like prove to myself. And I think the important thing at a really early stage is you have to get to a no. You have to get to a reason why the idea that you have is not going to work. Because if you can't get to a no, then you should just keep going. And you have to be brutally honest with yourself. Be like, I need to figure out why the hell this thing shouldn't work. And then if you can't get that answer, then you just keep inching forward. And why I share that is, before I even left my job, I talked to the grocery store, some of the grocery store folks, and understood the problem, and I understood the size of the waste. And then from a customer perspective, I'm like, will people buy this food? And so what I did is I got into a Facebook group at the time called Buns, and it was Toronto based. It's now called something different, but it was like a barter system. Like you could go in and you could trade stuff. So if you had like a decorative plate that you had in your apartment and you didn't want it, you could put it up and people could offer trade things. And people would go pick stuff up. So I put in, and there was like 60,000 people. It was like kind of this like indie underground, like trading cool Facebook group. And I put in there, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm trying to do. Like I'm going to build an app that reduces food waste. And this is how. And I'm like, would people use this? And then like a lot of people started commenting on it. I think there was like, I remember because within the first few hours, there was like almost 200 likes and something like 35 comments. And I remember being like, this is like, I didn't pay for any of this. This isn't an ad. There's just like real organic people saying they would do it. And then somebody forwarded me the Buns food group at the time, which was a group of 6,000 people that weirdly enough traded food. And that to me was insane. And so one of the stories that like solidified the customer side to me was, there was somebody who bought a sandwich from Tim Hortons and it had bacon on it and they didn't know it had bacon and they can't eat meat. So they're like, hey, I can't have this sandwich. Somebody else is like, I'll give you a Subway token for it. So the person's like, yeah, okay, but I'm leaving my house. So they
No way.
all this is
Sure.
They left their sandwich on their porch and then somebody went by, grabbed the sandwich and like left a Subway token. I was like, what? Like people do this? And then I actually interviewed one of those people. Like I like found the web and interviewed the person just like on a call. And she's like, yeah, like I didn't have any money to buy for, like I had nothing like until payday later that week. And then what I did, so that was like the onset. It's like customers will do it. There's a massive issue in the grocery sector. I don't have a guarantee from the grocers that they'll do this. That was like the gap that I had to walk, the bridge that I had to cross. But I knew customers would pay 50% off groceries. Like there's TV shows on like discounting. Like people will go to the store with their coupon book and like show how much they save. So you know that the demand from a customer is there. And then the other thing I did was, and this was after I left my job, but we went to a store at Bay and Dundas in downtown Toronto, like in the Times Square of Toronto. And there's a grocery store there. And I bought like $200 worth of like food that had a day left of shelf life. And we set up a table at the corner of Bay and Dundas, like literally like, think of like a little circular coffee table at a coffee shop. And we just like taped logos around the side of it. And they were like flapping away in the wind.
Do you have permission to do this, or like we'll only okay?
Nothing. And we sold all the food in like 20 minutes. We put it on
Just discounted it. You just put it 50% off, kind of.
I put it at $1 per item. And it was like within like 20 minutes, everything was sold. And it's because we put it on Facebook. We put it on these groups, all these threads that I was in. Like I just said like, hey, I'm doing this just to see if there was like real demand from a customer. And there was one girl who took a Subway half an hour to come pick up food. She's like, I just care so much about the environmental impact of this. Like I needed to support it. And I'm like, all right, like there's like that to me, check the box on customers. And then the big risk now is, can you build the tech? Yes. I don't know how, but yes. And then can you convince a grocer to do this? And I was like, I think we can.
Well, I'll say, just like one tangent, like there's the environmental impact, which drives people, I think. But I will say one thing that's like unsexy, but just like completely true on the consumer side, especially if you can make something dramatically cheaper, you will get dramatically more demand. Like basic economics 101, but you could see it everywhere. People love a good discount. And it drives like Black Friday, like whatever it is you want to think about, whatever your analogy is, a dollar store, like whatever it is, like it works. And so if you can obviously, selling something that costs a lot of money for less is a losing proposition. But if you can find a way to make things cheaper, you will typically get a lot of demand for it.
Especially food, because it's literally everybody has to eat. And it was funny because I care predominantly about the environment, and the market that we're in doesn't care about that. Like the market that we're in, people, consumers buying food care about affordability. So we actually went through like a full rebrand a couple times through the iteration, but our most recent was probably 2 years ago now. And it was more about like the joy of landing a deal and what you can provide for your family. We don't talk about the food waste angle anymore because it's to the market that we're serving, both grocers, both consumers. Like it doesn't dictate purchasing power, and it from consumers, it doesn't drive sales and purchases. And it doesn't, a lot of retailers have like sustainability goals and food waste reduction goals, but it does not, even though our numbers are meaningful for them at scale, like very meaningful, it doesn't drive decision-making from an executive level. So it ultimately comes down to like money and affordability from both the consumer and from the retailer side. And it was just a cool thing to learn through the growth of the business.
I think, and it makes, you see it, like you look at Temu, you look at Shein, like these companies are huge now, and everybody talks about, people made a big deal like Nike, 10, 20 years ago about like sweatshops and all this stuff. And it just like people care about it intellectually, and there's certainly like an amount of percentage of people who will actually make different, decisions, behavior, like consumer decisions because of it. But by and large, if you can get something 10 times cheaper, 50% like less, whatever, like kind of a meaningful amount less, like people will kind of ignore all that other stuff and just, and frankly, for a lot of people, that's just like the reality. I mean, I think there's only like a small percentage of people who get to consider the other factors because everybody else, like you said, has to eat. And that's priority number one. So then what do you do on the grocery store side?
So, well, we actually like took a video of that like Bay and Dundas thing, and then we sent it to the grocery executives being like, oh, they're for sure going to see this and they're going to be like, oh, this is awesome. Let's put this thing in our store. And like, didn't even get a response. Like completely ghosted. I'm like, okay, this is going to be a lot harder than I thought it was. So the way we got our first one store pilot, the guy that I went to university with, his dad used to be the CEO of Giant Tiger in Canada. And his former right-hand person was a guy named Jeff York, who was then the co-CEO of Farm Boy, which was a retailer. Now it's bigger than it was, and it still is headquartered in Ottawa, but they have locations across the GTA now. But then it was just Ottawa and 3 locations in London. So I got connected to Jeff on an email thread. And then after like a couple weeks, he just like stopped responding to my emails, which like kind of everybody does anyway. And so he had his phone number on his on his email sign off. So it was like a Monday, and I called him. I was like, "Hey Jeff, it's Josh from Flashfood. I'm hiring somebody for Eastern Ontario," which like I was not. We didn't have a company that. And I'm like, "I'm going to be in Ottawa on Friday. Are you around? I would love to meet." He's like, "Yeah, sure, happy to meet. Meet me at this store at this time." I was like, "Perfect." So I woke up at 4 a.m. on Friday. I drove 4 hours out to Ottawa. I read Jeff for like 20 minutes. He was on the phone for like 10 of those 20 minutes talking to somebody else. And then at the end of it, he's like, "Look, I like what you're trying to do. Like, I'll give you a chance at like one store in London," which was like furthest away from where their head office was at the time. And then he introduced me to a guy named Ryan, who's a VP there, who was like, I don't know, at the time, kind of voluntold to try this. And luckily for me, Ryan was just a great partner at the time and was really, he gave it a shot. And so that's how we got our first grocer. And it was Farm Boy in London, Ontario, just one location.
And this was after, like you're already full-time at this point?
I mean, like, I don't have a job at this point. Like, that's it. You're like, paid, like, spending all my time on this.
Full-time volunteer, yeah. obviously there's always the hustle, and like I think especially when you're trying to sell to effectively like a founder, they kind of see that and they want to give you a chance. But it also feels like it was a bit of a struggle for them to see the value. Like, is that true? Or what was like the friction point for the grocers? Like, what value were you trying to sell and what did they think about it? You know?
It's funny. So like we ended up having this pilot and it worked well enough that we ended up getting 3 stores in London, that we got another retailer who gave us 3 stores. Both Farm Boy and this other retailer at the time only had 30 locations. So we actually lost both of them because after about a year of like these pilots, they're like, look, the ROI is just not that high for all of our stores to do this. Like we only have 30 locations and like, it's just not enough money. But then I got connected to a former executive from Loblaws who connected me to the person who ran their entire discount division. And I told her the exact same story. I told her the metrics. So in these pilots, we were selling about 70% of all the food. We were driving in about 25 to 30% were net new shoppers to the store. And they were spending about 2 to 3 times more on full price food when they got to the store than what they spent on flash food. So if they were spending $10 on flash food, they're spending like 20 or 30 on full price stuff because you can't do your full shop on flash food.
And this is just to be clear, like in these pilots, what you have is you have consumers on an app. Like you already have an audience and an application. And when food comes in, you send them like a notification. Is that kind of how it worked?
The store every morning posts food on the Flashfood app and users can see what's available, pay for it, and go pick it up that day.
Oh, you pick ahead.
You know, in a lot of these places, we didn't have users. Like we had to like figure out how to get them. There was no users. The way that we got our users in the first store in London was we threw a pizza party at Western and invited, I don't even know how I got people there. Like we stood outside. We took a table outside the student center and we got approval for this. And we just started talking to people about what we were going to do. And then looking back, it was terrible because students don't have cars. So like going on campus, the store was like 10 kilometers from the campus. But that's what we did. We went to campus, got a bunch of emails, then had a pizza party a couple weeks later where like 27 people showed up to the pizza party. And then this is for the first store test. It ran like a week and a half. And of those 27, like maybe 7 or 10 people were customers on the app. And that was very manual. That was like emailing people being like, hey, the food's posted. We didn't have notifications. It was like, go check this out. And the process was terrible. It was janky. It was brutal. It looked awful. The food was kind of scattered in different places. It wasn't centralized. Like it was very, very bad. It was very bad.
But you still ultimately you got people to go to the store and buy this kind of food.
And the biggest thing was about 30% of those people went twice in 10 days, used the app twice. And I'm like, this is a small sample size, but like people will continue to shop this way. And like, this is the worst the experience will ever be. Like you couldn't do anything to make it worse. Like it was so terrible. Cashiers had no idea what it was. Employees didn't know what it was. Like consumers are trying to educate the employers. They've got no idea who to call. Like it was not good.
Why would the store say it didn't move the needle? Like it just wasn't enough shoppers for them?
No. Oh, this is like the first test. Then we ran it with 3 stores, and just in a 30 store chain, like the money's not that much if you roll it out across 30 stores. Now, at Loblaws or some of these other big partners, these are multi-billion-dollar companies. Like if you're hitting these numbers in like 900 stores, that's a material ROI for like basically no work, selling what you would have thrown out. So like, remember, they're taking their food, which is their money. They're throwing their money in the garbage and they're paying a waste management company to come pick up their money and take it away. And it's ruining the environment. So like my pitch over time to different executives, depending on who they are, came back to being like, do you want more money? They're like, well, yeah. You're like, okay. That's like overly simplified.
I guess the part that's a little confusing to me is like, if it works in, like, I understand the numbers are going to be 30 times bigger, 900 stores than 30 stores, but you'd think proportionately they're still throwing out whatever, 10% of their food, whatever that percentage is. So it should matter to them as much proportionally, like, but obviously not true. So like, why not?
Or maybe more, like it should maybe matter to them more. And what I learned over the years of selling into enterprise is like everything that you do, especially in a retail store, takes time. And so like there was one guy who I met with who was a senior executive, like C-level person at Target. And he and I had a relationship. And he's like, Josh, I was like, why don't you just do this across all your stores? He's like, people don't realize like for me to get like this pen moved from here to here across 1,600 stores and however many hundreds of thousands of employees. And like, those are in-store employees. However, like the training protocols, he's like, that sounds easy, but it's not. And so what I've learned is for big companies, especially retailers, they only have so many. Literally every year they do strategic planning where there's like, these are the 5 critical things we're working on. And maybe there's 1 or 2 innovations or 3. And like, those are the things we'll land on for next year. Let's go hit the plan. And that's what they do. Cause like, that's what good businesses, big businesses do. So try to like circumvent that and being something else that gets into that across an entire company, especially a company like the one that we were partnered with, who ended up going from 30 stores to like almost 50. They got acquired. Farm Boy got acquired by Sobeys for almost $900 million, like in the time period that we were working with them. So like them getting their P&L ready for like their process of selling their business was much more important now, like looking back, than like getting Flashfood to 30 stores. And you don't know that in the moment. Like they basically said like, hey, we've got to cut this off. And I had no real reason why. And then fast forward like 8 or 9 or 12 months later, they had acquired for whatever they got acquired for. And they're like, look, we had to like clean everything up in the business. Like we couldn't have a couple things lingering in different stores. It had to be uniform across the board.
I love that because it speaks to the, like, we talk a lot about like solving like a number 1 or number 2 priority problem for your customer. And I think this often gets, I think this is something like people say a lot, hair on fire problem, all these sort of things. So it's cliche. People like know it, but it gets a little lost because I see founders who are not doing that. And yet like the thinking is almost like, well, I'm delivering an ROI. Like clearly I deliver an ROI. So then people should buy the thing because I deliver an ROI. Because like if you could spend $1 on something and get 3 back, like everybody should just do that because that's good business. The reality is like the way companies work, they just can't do that. Like you can't do everything that promises you to get $3 for every dollar you spend. It's too many initiatives, it's too many projects. And like you have to remember, as much as let's say a company might have like 10,000 employees, it's not 10,000 brains doing 10,000 initiatives. Like it all boils down to like a handful, and in any given sector or space or whatever it is, like let's say food waste or like inventory, wherever that falls into, it's probably like 1, maybe 2 execs. Like that's how many brains. And so like they can only do, 2, 3, 4 big things a year. And you have to factor in what you said, which is whatever they do, they also understand they got to get everybody aligned. They got to get like everybody trained, all these sort of things. So you have to find something that for someone who has actual budget is going to be a number 1 or number 2 priority thing. Otherwise, you're just going to be pushing up a boulder up a hill forever. And maybe like through sheer hustle, you get some people to finally say yes, but you're never going to get that pull.
And that's why VCs rarely put money into these kinds of food tech companies. Honestly, like that's it. Like I've learned like through years, like it's very difficult to do what we're doing because we're selling to executives, food safety, merchandising, marketing, operations. Like you need a lot of people to align to do this. And we're over like the hump now. Like those are still challenges, but now there's the pull. Like now it's a lot of inbound. We launched an independent product. So like retailers are like lighting up fast now, but it literally took years to get over the hump. And then in the middle of that hump too, like we had a board meeting earlier this week. So like, it's just fresh in my mind, like where different people will be like, oh, like, why did it take so long to go from Canada to the US? And like, everybody has a horror story about COVID. And I don't like referring back to COVID about things, but there's literally 18 months where like me and my head salesperson who live in Canada could not get into America. So like, when you look back on that time period, like, everybody tells COVID stories and like, I don't want to, but like when you look back on this, it was pretty funny. Like here we are trying to sell and they're like, how does it work in the store? I'm like, well, I can't show you, but here's this video that I could show. Like, what's that? What? What? So it's just like, it's funny to think through that. And ultimately like so there's something that I want to touch on that you talked about, but what I learned was, especially for consumer, but any like big business, Canada is not big enough to build a big business in a lot of industries in sectors, in my opinion. Like you need to go to America. So when we rolled out with Loblaws, like I was talking to executives at Metro, at Sobeys, and like there were copycats that came out and did exactly what we're doing. And like those companies would work with them because they weren't us. And I'm like, listen, I'm going to America now. Like that's the focus. But what I want to touch on that you were talking about around stakeholder buy-in is the other thing that people don't talk enough about as like two early stage founders building a thing that is so obvious, that has such an ROI to somebody who should want to buy it, is people don't care about their jobs that much. And what I mean by that is like somebody has to go out of their way to do a thing, especially if they're not told to do it by their boss. They have to go out of their way to do a thing and to spend time on a thing, to like bring a thing to life within a big organization. Are these people like, do they have young kids? Are they going to their cottage on the weekend with their families and like drinking wine? And like, are they going on vacations? Like, yeah, they're doing all of those things. So like, not that they don't care about their job, but like for them to go out of their way to like help a young enterprising or an enterprising person like build something within their business that's going to be such a headache, that's not going to get them paid more most times, very unlikely going to get them promoted, which like fortunately, one of the low key things that really helped us was almost every stakeholder that ushered us along had meaningful promotions in a short amount of time, because we went in to sell through executives and they started to know other people's names to the point where like it's really benefited some people's careers being the leader internally at Flashfood. But that's like impossible it's very difficult to try to usher that along in a business and to like convince somebody that you'll do that for them. Like it's very hard for somebody to believe that. And then the other side of things is the grocery sector is like by definition not risky because you're selling groceries. And so you think about who makes and like we've grocery shopped pretty much the same way from the time our grandparents were taking us till now. Like sure, there's like delivery and there's like cool things to do within a store, but ultimately you want to have like fresh food and the chance to like pick through and see what you want to buy. And it's an experience. And even with delivery, like I think through COVID, there was like an 11% uptick of like total grocery shopping was like up to 11 or 12% for delivery during COVID, when like if you left your house, you would die at like the peak of COVID. So it's like, is everybody going to get their groceries delivered? Probably not. Like we literally couldn't leave our houses other than to go grocery shopping, and they stayed open. So all that comes back to like, you think about the people in leadership positions within the company that you're in and how they got there. It was not by taking huge risks and being right. It was actually by like mitigating risk and staying in like the middle path and being respectful and being liked enough to like move up in these roles. So if you're selling into a big company, it's usually going to be somebody who like says that what you're doing is cool, but they're not risky and they haven't had success in their career being risky. And then the other thing is they're probably making the most money they've ever made. And the personal risk of them, if their kids are in private school.
I'm really worried because listen, like you've been listening for like what, 10, 20, 30 minutes now. Clearly you like it. And the thing is, the next episode is way better and you're going to miss it. You're going to miss it because you're not following the show. So take your phone out and hit that follow button. They have a lot to lose, especially like, you know, you as a startup, like you have no credibility, none. So as much as like you're sure that it's going to help, it's going to do the thing, like they've heard other pitches and like, frankly, they don't really care and they don't have that much upside. So I think, so then that kind of raises the question, like, how do you get Loblaws to sign up?
It honestly goes back to Jeff York, the guy at Farm Boy, who just like saw that I really cared about it. And back to what you were talking about, founder-led sales, like you have to be like, people have to know and feel from meeting you that you're going to do everything you can to pull something off. And then that's when somebody throws you a bone. And then fast forward, that Loblaws meeting happened middle of 2018. And so for context, like we were in 6 stores, so 2 partners, all of 2017. They basically like shut down in Q2 of 2018, and that's when we had the Loblaws meeting. We were in 4 stores in Loblaws in September. So at Loblaws, I met the decision maker, got to the right person, and she was like...
And by the way, at this point, you're still unfunded, like living on your credit card, or did you raise around at this point?
We had raised $450K when we built the app before the first store. So that was in the beginning of 2017, end of 2016, $450K Canadian. And then we raised $750 toward I think we raised a $450 at the end of 2016, October, November, $750 like November-ish of 2017. And then we were like out of money. Like when we raised the $750, we had $753,000 in the bank, like after the round. So if you, and like that, like part of that was like we won Startup Fest, which was $100,000 that came in as in Montreal. And so when people say like we're out of money, like it was like out of money. And then the Loblaws meeting happened. And we went through Techstars at the time, so we had a little bit more money. Company, I'm like, look, I tried for like 2.5 years to sell into grocery. The grocers have told me they're not going to do this. Like, that's basically what's happened. I've done it in 2 different partners. I met with all the executives and all the companies in Canada.
I mean, that's because I just want to pause on that. Like, there's nothing worse. Honestly, there's nothing worse. Like, you can get like investors that say no. You can have customers who don't want to try it. You can have employees or co-founders who quit. But I don't think there's anything worse personally than doing the pilot, actually having a level of success and like, kind of the things working. And then 2 of them saying, yeah, it doesn't kind of move the needle for me. Like, what do you know what I mean? Like, I just want to put that because you kind of just set it off the cuff. But like, I'm just thinking like, if me in that shoes, I'm like, man, okay, like it's done. Like, what am I doing? You know what I mean?
You know what the play would have been? It would have been to open up pop-up shops starting around the country with like severely discounted food that I get from like third parties like farms. So they bring it and then the food terminal. Like I literally think downtown Toronto, downtown Montreal, like in like a cool area, you've got a small grocery store. It's only tech. You can only pay with like software and you just come in and canvas the store and you buy food and you can get it at such a good price because I can get it. Like that's where my mind was going. And then I'm like, do I want to do that? Like, no.
All right. A lot of work.
Crazy. I want to run a grocery store, but you're spot on. Like, but on the flip side, I think that that's back to what I said at the start of the call. That's a great place to be because that's the market telling you that it doesn't want you. So you could have like, you could do the whole like, I don't know, man, like product just drives me nuts sometimes, just like product ideology and like all the work that goes into like building a thing and thinking of a feature. And like that drives me nuts because it's all like, here's what we think will happen. Here's like the research that we've done. Here's the interviews we had. Like get something in somebody's hand and then see what buttons they're clicking and then make that easier and make that a better experience. And that's how you build great product.
I've gone so agnostic on this stuff. And like, I know there's attention, but like kind of somebody saying, man, like, well, this company that's like kind of like, this is what happens in our world all the time, right? Like company X is like not doing that well, but now they have this new idea, like they're going to do this thing and like, here's how it's going to work. And like, blah, blah. And then you're like, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, that's pretty exciting. I'm like, I don't know, dude. Like yeah, fuck, it sounds good. Like, I don't know. You don't know. He doesn't know. Nobody knows. Go put it out there. And like the thing goes up and people adopt it. It's a great idea. And otherwise it didn't work. Like it just in theory, so many things sound great. And in practice, so few actually are. That's just
yeah. And what's really tricky in your shoes is like trying to not get the seductive, polished entrepreneur who can convince you why it's going to be so great and like seeing through that because like, man, I ran this thing through like the hottest startup funding and then like the worst startup funding markets in the last like 30 years, like since the .com boom. And there's companies that I like knew intimately. Like I knew a lot of the details. I was very close with the founders. They were very charismatic and they were raising at such high I didn't even know like, and I come from finance. I was a banker and then I was at a family office. And so like, I'm very adept with like diligence and like digging through companies. There's companies that were like raising money and it's like basically fraud. I'm like, this is basically fraud. Like I can't, and it was happening so much. And I understand it on the flip side because investors are competing with each other to like put money in the next Adam Newman, who's like going to the moon with the thing. And even like Travis Kalanick, like these people had to have that way of thinking to win. And then the VC model is built on hitting the winners. Like that's it. Like you get like a 3X, it doesn't matter. You get a 5X, it doesn't really matter depending on the size of your fund. So it was just like fascinating to live through, but like, yeah, it's fun. I could see what I was going to say is you don't know until you look back on things. Like you just don't know. So back to what you're asking about Loblaws and why they made the call. We got into Loblaws in the end of Q3, Q4 of 2018 in 3 of their stores in London. And by January in 2019, we went from like 3 stores to 400 over a span of 6 weeks. Because they were like, this makes so much sense when putting this in half of our stores. And like they lit it up. Like they put it out. We did joint marketing. They had a Super Bowl commercial about Flashfood. Like it was just insane when you back to what we're talking about. Like it's really hard to fit into these boxes for a big company. When you do, and if you could pull it off, like it's like nothing that you do.
I mean, let's dive into that because that's product market fit, right? And I want to understand like between those other pilots and this one, did you change the product at all? And
Nothing, literally nothing changed. Nothing.
So then on the market side, like what was different about those smaller, like you kind of touched on this, but I just want to go deeper on it. Like what was different about those smaller ones and this bigger one that they loved what they saw and the other ones didn't really care?
Probably that the smaller ones could still grow by adding locations. And Loblaw is such a big company, as are most retailers, that like now in different markets, Canada or America, you actually have to divest stores in different areas if you want to launch stores in a particular area. Like you can't just grow to as many locations as you want because of anti-competition laws. So when you think about those big companies and like an opportunity for not even growth, because like, again, like the financial upside was like they won, but like these companies can lose $20 million in the couch in a year. Like even with the massive ROI that we're driving, now it's material. I don't think they anticipated it to be this big for all of our big parks. But yeah, I think it was like these companies, it's harder for them to have an edge and they have to spend a lot more and have to do a lot more R&D versus the smaller companies that can still be really scrappy and scale. And you also have more resources at the big companies where you've like established things nationwide a lot more credibly and consistent and roll things out differently than like a 15 store chain that just became a 30 store chain, or like a 20 store chain that just became a 30 store chain. Like they're still like, they don't have a lot of, those are not big companies, even though they're multi-billion dollar companies in the grocery space. Those are very small, multi-billion in sales. So I guess it's that like we ended up just getting, honestly, we got lucky. Like I got to the right person at the right time. The product was in the right place and it just hit. And she like tested it in London where we already had users. So like Farm Boy shuts down 3 stores, Loblaws turns on next week. Like it just like.
And what was the ROI? Like what does that look like for them? And also what's even the model? I guess we didn't talk about that. What's the price?
It's like a take rate. So we take a percentage of sales. So all the sales happen through us and then we send the retailer back money. And for these public companies, they look at it as a contract, their waistline. So the money that comes in goes like against their waistline in the P&L. So for grocery, 2 or 3% margin company, this is found money right to the bottom line. It's how they realize the revenue. And like it's in the millions and tens of millions for different partners, like net after all fees that they're getting back on an annualized basis. Some of them like it's between like our established partners, it could be between like 5 and 40 million annualized that they're getting back from us.
With no, I mean, the only cost to them is kind of the infrastructure, the setup, the kind of training part of it, like whatever they have to do in a store to just facilitate this, but they're not paying SaaS fee. Like there's no kind of hard cost against that newfound money.
And they're also saving money on disposal because they're disposing less now and they pay based on tonnage.
And so maybe walk me through this in that first year. You're kind of struggling, like you've got a year of just like kind of on the side, then, sometime on the side, then like maybe a year of just struggle and you finally get these pilots and then they tell you no. And then Loblaws comes in and you go from like that 3 to 400. What does revenue look like that year? Like when you're at the end of that year and you're at 400, like what kind of run rate revenue are you looking at?
I don't know. I'd have to look back, but it was like, yeah, I have no idea. It would have been like $0, like maybe $1,000 to like north of $1 million, maybe like $1.5 million, $1 million. I don't know. I'd have to look back. It happened so fast too, because we went to 400 and then by the middle of the year, we went to 750. So like it literally just massive compounding effect.
This was what, 2019 now?
This was 2019 and we raised a seed round. At the end of 2018, when the Loblaws deal signed, we raised a seed round led by General Catalyst. And so 2019 was just like...
And then 2020, what happens?
But also we hold on to the cash, 100% of the GMV for like different partners, but like between 30 and 60 days, between 45 and 60 days. So like the negative working capital as you're growing, you just keep building up and building up.
That's beautiful.
And then 2020 happened and like our business, we had a board meeting on the Friday when the NBA shut down. And we were like, okay, let's model out if it gets cut in half, the business. And then we were like, 2 days later, we were selling like 10% of what we were like at the board meeting. It's like, okay, like that's where it's like you get these really smart people that have built things and even you model out what the world could look like. And then you're wrong 48 hours later. And going back to like product and all the things, it's like, you can hypothesize what the future is going to look like and still be very wrong, regardless of how many times you're right in the past. And like it's hard to not seduce yourself into thinking you're smarter than you are on predicting the future.
So I assume, I mean, things like the short story, we won't get into this part of the story because we're all about 0 to 1, but I would assume the short story is kind of like things rebounded and you rebounded along. You hadn't burned that much capital, so you kind of had the time to wait out those. I mean, it wasn't that long for grocery, right? Like maybe 6 months, you're probably back to good levels.
There was the challenge. Yeah, the challenges that we had were like touching for Flashfood. The grocer employee has to touch the food and bring it over to somewhere else. And a lot of them just paused us because they're like, we don't want our employees touching anything that they don't have to. There was like plexiglass put up, sprays all over the place. So it was just touch and go. But like, yeah, the business rebounded like everybody else did. Like there was no major pivots. We just had to button down the hatches and hold on, just like everybody else. Like it was not unique.
And where are you at now? Like how many stores? Are you profitable? What kind of revenue levels are you doing?
Not profitable, pushing towards it. In just under 2,500 stores. And I think what we announced publicly was that we've saved shoppers over $250 million US on their groceries since we launched. So like that's 50% off. So it's like, that would be the GMV number. Yeah.
I assume you're over like 8 figures ARR, 8 figures run rate. Yeah.
Yeah. What is 8 figures? Millions? Yeah. We're at
tens. 10
yeah, we're at tens. We're in the tens of millions in revenue. And
well, that's awesome, man. You built a pretty solid business. Wasn't easy. Like it never is. I mean, it really rarely is. Every now and then I get somebody on here. It's just like I launched a thing and it just worked. But that's like out of the ones that work, that's like 5%. Out of the entire bucket, that's like 0.5%. So this is more aligned.
The thing that I'll say too is like I was a solo founder, but like there was very early people that like worked their asses off alongside me. And like this whole thing doesn't happen if it's not for the team. And I think it's just like that's said about every business. Like it's not me and others that like do these interviews. Like it could sometimes be like, oh, I did this thing. And like, that's just bullshit. It's like a collection of people that like took risk, worked more than like all of the things in the
How do you get people to go all in? Like founders is easy. They're motivated. They started with you. How do you get other people to be all in those early days, the first 5-10 people?
Yeah, that comes back to the kind of person that you are. It's check, like the business has to check the box on like, yeah, this can be big. Because you have to tell like a compelling story of something that can be big, not be lying about the future. Because then people will be like, that's bullshit. I'm not going to like risk my career for like this guy who's just lying about how big this can be. And then have conviction. Man, today people want to be led. A lot of people want to be led by somebody who has conviction and is like willing to do stuff. So when like the early team sees that I'm just like buying a table and putting it at the corner of Bay and Dundas and filming us selling groceries for $1, they're like, who the hell does this? We also had the way we got our first CTO. He was on sabbatical. He had sold his last company and he was like taking time off. And I got him to do an audit on our app. And then he lived in Liberty Village and he's like, hey, I don't want to join. Like, I'll do the audit, but like, I'm not going to join full time. I can't commit to it. I'm like, okay. So what we did was we only had $50K in the bank and we saw like a small 2-story loft space office in Liberty Village and we rented it. I don't know why the landlord gave it to us. We signed a 3-year lease, $5,000 a month, went on Kijiji, bought a whole bunch of used furniture with a van, dropped it off and like, invited our CTO to like come into the office and he comes in, he's like, oh, okay. Like, I guess you guys are like kind of real. Like, sure, whatever, I'll join. I'm in. And so like, you just have to take like, these are stupid decisions. Like, these are like decisions that like nobody should do. Like, they're not like, hey, do this. This is going to work. Like, no, you have to do some dumb things and be willing to make mistakes and be willing to lose. And that's like the thing that I think I come back to is like, I wasn't afraid to fail on this because it was just too important. And I think how you get people along, for me at least, was like, the environmental impact of this has to change. Like it just can't stay the same. So that was the mission that I started on. And now the affordability piece is like equally, if not more important for the world. So that'd be it for us at least.
Perfect. Well, Josh, man, we'll stop it there. I think that's a perfect ending point. We typically have like when do you find product market fit and last piece of advice, but I think that was the last piece of advice. And I think the product market fit is pretty obvious when you go from 3 to like 750 stores in 12 months. That was probably when you felt it.
Yeah, it was a ride. I appreciate you having me on, Pablo. Thank you.
Listen, when you go to like a restaurant, you eat a nice, meal, maybe a fancy one, maybe not. Do you leave a tip? I assume you probably leave a tip. You probably leave a tip 100% of the time. Well, guess what? A review is just like a tip. And I know you haven't been leaving one. So just like the waiter that doesn't get a tip after hours of great service, I'm getting a little frustrated. So take your phone out and leave a review. It helps the show move up rankings. It helps us get better guests. It doesn't just help me. It helps way more founders. Thank you.